Welcome back to our Verdict 2023 studios as we continue to keep our eyes on this process for you. It's the governorship and state assembly elections. We've had quite a number of results declared, and we're continuing with the conversation from this side of the divide as we welcome our next guest in the studio, Mrs. Abosede Alimi. She's an analyst for the Election Result Analysis Dashboard.
Welcome. Good evening. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Maybe I should just jump in straight away and I want to ask you, what have you made of the results that you've heard so far today? Quite a lot of people have said, well, really, we don't have that many surprises. Many of the incumbents have retained their seats. Many of the things that we saw in the presidential election, we're not seeing them in the governorship. Is that correct? And what kind of pattern has emerged, if any, from the figures that you have?
I think that there are a few things that we're seeing. So first of all, I think the evidence that people oftentimes prioritize the presidential election is playing out in terms of voter turnout. So there's that piece of it. But also, and I followed your very interesting coverage of the elections, and that dynamics of the fact that, people who had to deliver the presidency under another party now go back to their state and are able to actually deliver the state for themselves, under a different party, which really tells me about the sophistication of the electorate in those states. And that's something that, that we talk about in terms of political literacy. But I think that that's an interesting dynamics in terms of how sophisticated the electorate are in those states to understand that. So in terms of trend, we also know how once the presidential election happens, it tends to influence some of the outcomes we begin to see. So in terms of, the governors who have been returned, not many surprises, if we're honest. But I think for the newly elected governors, there have been some surprises within the states in terms of, people winning in, well, let's say fresh parties, and then unconventional candidates, what I'll put as non-traditional candidates. And so I think, generally not too surprising, but I think, democracy is playing out, right?
But perhaps we can be state-specific with that political sophistication that you've talked about by looking at one or two of the states. For instance, we've seen in Benue where the incumbent has lost, and we've seen the opposition party take that seat. We've also seen in Kano State where the incumbent has lost. So what do you think is playing out here? What are the things responsible for the political sophistication?
So I think, we continue to have this conversation around are voters voting the personality? Are they voting the party? Or what exactly is it that they're voting for? And I think that in a case of Kano, right, with the NNP winning, it is evident that is driven by personality. And I think that is consistent with what we saw in the presidential election. And so I think that that's a very interesting dynamic around one person having that much influence and control over the outcome of an election, not just during the gubernatorial. And we also saw it with the National Assembly seats as well, being swept by that party. And I think that what we're beginning to see is an emergence of sort of an ABGA, right, within the north, where they're winning that one state, but they're owning it across. And I think that that's, very evident in Ekanu, for example, driven by personality, which I find very interesting, because I think in terms of sophistication, I wonder if, as the electorate, we understand that actually politics and election is a pathway to governance, right? That is the end goal. And so, that person who has been a former governor of the state, I wonder if that influence is coming from performance, for example. And therefore, you believe that everything that he endorses will definitely perform along the same line. So, without having to do a deep dive, I wonder, what's driving that. But definitely there is some clarity and understanding about, the politics of the state. And in a state like Kano, people actually come out to vote.
Because that was going to be my point.
Yeah, it was 33% compared to other states that were around the 20% range. So they actually know what they're doing.
So, but then that brings up, because I'm happy you mentioned that, because that brings up the issue of turnout. In the presidential election, so much also has been made of people saying, well, it looks like, in spite of all the hype that preceded the election and so on, the number of people who actually turned out on the day to vote, you know, was less than those who turned out in 2019, and that it's been on a downward trajectory for quite a while. But then the counter argument is that the introduction of beavers, and then
goats and cows.
That's right, and that perhaps that then takes attention and spotlight back to the issue of the voters register. That because the cleanup that has taken place mostly between 2019 and now.
But
a number of the names
back to 1999. So how many dead people in that register, for example?
Which we are using to calculate percentage of turnout.
Absolutely, because you know we don't have like a coherent population data that feeds into each other, where if there's a death certificate, then it automatically eliminates. So I think that that's really, really valid. But to your point, I think the lower turnout we have seen in this election is actually linked more, if you ask me, to BVAS and that fact that, look, you have to show up and actually be identified and be verified before you vote, right? So if you were standing in front of me and I was actually an official and I see that you're underage, there is no confusion about it, right? I can see you're underage. Even if you have a PVC, you're not going to vote. So I think that has contributed.
That speaks to that.
Well, we had some underage, you know, experience with underage voting even in this election.
Yes.
I'd like you to speak to that. But first, let's head over to Abuja, where our colleagues have also got guests and they're set to do some engagement.
All right, so Chamberlain, Maukbe, and Nelta, what's going on? What's happening in Abuja? How is it at this point?
Well, just checking to see if anything has dropped from somewhere. Just as some residents of Kaduna are also waiting to see, and Adamawa as well, saying, oh dear, what happened to us there in Adamawa State? But here in the studios, we've got Dr. Iroro Izu, who is a lecturer in the Department of Political Science, University of Abuja. Good evening. Thank you for coming on today.
My pleasure. Yeah, thank you. Good evening.
Speaking about political science, is there any science to our politics from what you've seen? What have you seen?
Of course, there's other science of politics, because political science is all about the science of politics and the politics of science.
Are you bringing politics? Okay, you're bringing the politics
so
in
now, Nigeria's election, that we have seen as is trying to demystify actually some of the laid down political standards and theories, so to say, because this is a democracy. However, it's taking a dimension that looks like a plutocracy, which is characterized by this idea, of the criminalization of the process, talking about vote buying now, for instance, where you see in some states, you see the exchange of a wrapper, for votes, or of cash, for votes. That is plutocracy, the government by the money bags, as the case may be. However, the election, has thrown up a lot of, dynamics. And this governorship election, somehow, it looks not too good, compared to the presidential election, because in the presidential election, the only snag, then was revolved around issues, that border on the IREV, not really, the process. The issue of vote buying was not prevalent. Insecurity, violence, disturbances.
So it was not prevalent, or wasn't too out there in your face as it was in the governorship election?
Yes.
Because there were incidents, albeit far and wide, there were incidents of vote buying and snatching of ballot boxes, and some voter suppression as well.
During the presidential.
During the presidential.
But it became more very, very palpable, very, very visible in the governorship election. I cannot remember if there were killings during the presidential election. But in this governorship election, over about 20 people have been killed, and then this is across board, talking about voters, INEC officials, security agents, and so on and so forth. So I feel that the presidential election, the process, the characterization of that election was far better than the governorship election. Why? Because I think it's because of the fact that some of the governors or some of the parties, felt that they became desperate seeing that wave. But that wave did not really occur in this governorship election. So they miscalculated, and that led to desperation.
Your words that the Nigerian election, this election,
yeah,
is demystifying the norm. Can you just walk us through what's the norm in the political space and the science behind it? So
democracy.
And then how the Nigerian election, this election process is demystifying that norm.
Now, because this is supposed to be a democracy, where you have some fundamental principles that define the credibility of elections, or what can be categorized as a credible election. Talking about citizens or electorate going to vote, willingly, without any form of compulsion or coercion. But we see in some instances, where there were some elements of coercion, compulsion, even profiling. So if you don't want to vote for a particular political party, you may be disallowed, from freely casting your, or exercising your franchise. So that itself is going against the fundamental democratic norms known worldwide. So where you have, people, wanting to induce people. So in some places they induce them. Inducement is different from coercion, because inducement, that means they're giving you something, to bribe you. But coercion, outrightly, bringing some form of violence, to threaten you, to intimidate you. I think those things, they demystified. They try to, go against, what should be acceptable in democratic climate for this governorship election.
Well, I find it interesting. I mean, right now, with benefit of hindsight, it looks like the presidential elections are almost appearing saintly, in spite of the fact that a number of things did not work.
Yeah.
Now, these are governorship elections. In many instances, we're told, a number of CSOs have done their preliminary assessment. They've talked about how the BVAS was functional, at least in the places that they monitored. I'm looking at this report now from Yaga. They said in about 88% of polling units in Benue, the BVAS functioned. These are the states that they monitored. The BVAS functioned properly. However, in 10% of polling units, BVAS malfunctioned. In 88% of polling units in Delta, the BVAS functioned properly. In 80% of polling units in Kano, BVAS functioned properly. We've also seen IREV functioning as it ought to. Yet, people are, not generally, there is a feeling of disappointment that this is not exactly how this democracy ought to be. This is not what we're supposed to be looking at in terms of. So what exactly would you say the fundamentals are that are missing, in spite of the fact that BVAS worked largely, in spite of the fact that the IREV is up and running? Never mind the results that are on there. That's another kettle of fish.
Of course.
But it's up there. So big question, what do you think is the biggest fundamental that is missing, that is leaving this feeling of disappointment?
I think we can do a comparative, assessment now between this and the presidential election. So during the presidential election, the major missing link there could be situated, around the Independent National Electoral Commission. Their inability to deploy on time, logistic issues, and of course the issue of the IRF. But in this governorship election, the major, missing link, could be situated within, that ambit of security, the security operatives. Because I recall that I was in one of the studios with the DIG, after the presidential election, and he said that the governorship election the security is going to be very tight. But we have seen that the question of people snatching ballot boxes, the question of violent disturbances at the polling units and so on, and even collation centers. All those things, they border on the proactiveness of the security, architecture, operatives, within there. So that was actually the major missing link in this governorship election, because the security operatives, they have the sole responsibility of protecting voters, protecting even the INEC officials, and protecting normal civilians. But that's, as I'm done, in this election, we have a lot of new voters, those who came, who participated in voting for the first time. And this is going to serve as a kind of a discouragement going forward, for them, because they will assume that is this politics with, this war with bloodshed that we're experiencing in Nigeria, and one would have thought that we would have gone beyond or gone above this idea, of using violence, by all means. And these beavers were supposed to actually deter, such happening, because even if you steal the beavers, even if you disrupt the election, even if you go and write results, the understanding was that those results will not be used, because whatsoever is uploaded, must correspond, or whatsoever is brought physically must correspond with whatever has been uploaded, previously. But they still go ahead to do all these things.
But it takes me to the quality of the results on the IREV. We saw the Labour Party governorship candidate in Lagos do a presentation on some of the results that were posted on the IREV. Even the PDP governorship candidate raised objections as to the sort of results that were posted on the IREV. Just a cursory look. Sometimes you just go to a state, go to a local government, go to a ward and a polling unit, sometimes you wonder how it is that, things that people saw in their polling units is very different from what was posted on the IREV. So there are questions as to even the fact that this was supposed to be something that was supposed to deepen the transparency of the process and deter. Because I think essentially that's what the IREV was supposed to do, deter people from trying to manipulate the results. It was saying that it did not have that particular effect. And it raises questions as to, what sort of values. I mean, if our politicians are afraid of any consequences at all, why would anybody try to paste a result different from what was done at a polling unit on a platform that everybody can see and verify as false?
That also calls to the question of the objectivity of those who are employed or appointed or chosen as INEC staff, whether ad hoc or whatsoever, because they are supposed to. I'm aware that they swear, oath of neutrality and so on and so forth. Perhaps confidentiality. So, but you see where you have people posting results that are different from even the one that they gave to the party agents and so on and so forth at the polling units, then that is a typical criminality, and those people concerned should be dealt with in that order. Because you are trying to rape democracy. Because once elections are defective, democracy is automatically defective. So if anybody is responsible for such and defectiveness, that person should be brought to book. So they are trying to compromise the beavers. So that, they will say that this technology is not even working. Perhaps let's return back to the old days where there was no beavers. Because the IREV, the beavers, fantastic device. The IREV, fantastic supportive, mechanism. So, and this would have given us the latitude to be celebrating now. I believe the observer missions that came, to Nigeria, the foreign observer missions that came to Nigeria, they came with a lot of enthusiasm to come and see this new thing that we have added, to our electioneering process. Perhaps it's going to be a game changer. But they have rubbished, the entire process, by posting fake results, even posting pictures, to the IRF that were not even related to the election. I think, INEC need to do a self-audit, of this election, a self-audit, and even perhaps independent inquiry, to ascertain especially those areas where those false results, those false postings, came from, and people should be dealt with, accordingly, because the elections are supposed to be sacrosanct. everything about the election is supposed to be sacrosanct. But some people have committed political sacrilege.
When you say INEC should go through that process of picking out where the results were posted from and how those errors were made, do you think INEC, wouldn't that be asking too much of INEC? The commission is already appearing overburdened with plenty of work, and you want to add this one on top of that.
That is their work. That is their job. So they should do it because every result emanated from the polling units. So it's not everywhere. But I'm saying that they need to ensure that, because we have election end of this year, we have election next year. I'm talking about governorship election. So if people are not dealt with, it will be a norm that will continue. So INEC should take responsibility for their action. They had, because of INEC, the Electoral Act was amended to give them a long period of time to plan. Funding was released for a long period of time. So if they were going to engage anybody, now people were saying that, okay, the reason why the Beavers worked, better this governorship election was because of the fact that they did retraining of the staff. I think that is too lame. What have you been doing all this while? You had Oshun to test run. You had Ekiti to test run. This same device. You even did mock accreditation exercises. So you had a lot of period to do all these things. So I don't think it is time that they didn't have. I think it's just laxity on the part of some persons.
Well, we've also taken a look at, I've just taken a second look at the states that have been declared so far, and it looks like we have at least 18 states in the bag. We're still waiting for the results of about 10 others. And there are big questions as to what exactly are these states called. It's not federal elections, it's state elections. I don't know whether this has come as any surprise to you, because these are some of the things that we're hoping that the technology introduced will help solve seamlessly. The elections have since been concluded, but for a few places where, INEC has said that they're going to take a look at, etc. What in your own mind right now do you think could be causing this delay?
I think it has come to me as a huge surprise, I think it is also giving room for this idea of making people to be suspicious of whatever results that will finally be declared in those places. Why would results be declared inconclusive after you have taken all the results from all the local governments in the particular states? So during the presidential, they said that it would take them time to transport the result from their states, maybe physically. I don't know, from their state to Abuja. This one is just within your state, and yet these things are happening. So I think it is this lack of a sense of accountability that is what is causing this situation. People are not accountable to anybody. People don't have that sense of public office being, something that is tied to accountability. So people still take these things, with levity. And Nigerians should begin to, see that, such people should not be given any kind of a serious, position in going forward.
We're not the only developing country that does elections with trying to achieve what we are trying to achieve, because there are several examples of countries, even in Africa, that have done certain things that are worthy of note. So moving forward, concerning technology as well, what would you recommend we do? Because you have some people who will say, well, perhaps they've seen the challenges that we faced or encountered as a result of introduction of BVAS and DIREV. How would you suggest we move forward with this?
Now, before I answer that question, let me just say something. In some smaller African countries, even Ghana, people who will be on duty on election day, they are given the privilege to even vote before the election. Like journalists, like health workers, like observers, people who will be on duty on election day. Because technically many of us, are disenfranchised because of our responsibilities, to the nation on election day. So we don't have the privilege to go and vote. So technically we are disenfranchised. But if you see some smaller countries like even Ghana, people are allowed to vote, ahead of time. But if you try that in Nigeria, somehow they will say they will even rig that election that will be done before the election day. So I think technology is very, very fundamental. Is the word.
So we can't give up on it.
No, we cannot give up on it. We must improve on it. And the persons, they say technology is as good as the people who are managing or manning the technologies. So who are using the technology. So if the people are not competent enough, if the people are not dispassionate enough to ensure that the technology work, that means we need to maybe either sack all of them and train new fresh persons, on how to use those.
Can we afford that? That's a tall order.
Of course, it's a tall order, but we're talking about the soul of democracy now, which is election. Anybody that wants to scuttle such process is trying to kill our democracy. It's taking us back to the dark chambers, of autocracy, because people are trying to practice a different thing in the name of democracy. That is the truth about it. Kleptocracy, criminality everywhere. So it's not really democracy they are practicing, because you cannot have democracy without Democrats. That's the truth about it.
Okay, let's see if we can pass the same question on to this question of democracy.
Do they think we have Democrats? Really and truly?
To the guest you have in our Lagos studio, Mr. Alime. What do you think about the submission here by Mr. Ibu? If the Nigerian Nigeria's democracy has Democrats, and from what he's put forward here, the democratic process in Nigeria has somewhat defied in the political science. He's a political scientist. What they know to be democracy, Nigeria's system has completely defied it. What do you think?
So, yes, thank you very much for that question. So, if I hear you correctly, I think it's, first of all, we are a developing democracy, right? I don't know if, he agrees, but we're a developing democracy. So what are the sort of features of a democracy? So it's important to have the rule of law. It's important to have, like social stability and all of those things. Now, I would say that we are a developing democracy. And why I'm emphasizing on that is I followed the conversations earlier, and I think that it's important for us to understand why it is important for us to, first of all, see what has worked so that we can move on. Nigeria is not going to move past its existing systems and structures, right? And I think a lot has been said about that in terms of the institutions that we have, right? Because until people are not above the law, right, which is why that rule of law, and I heard somebody talking earlier about the criminal justice system and who is sanctioned for what. Until some of those things are put in place, honestly speaking, we are not going to move forward. As we've been talking about, we'll come again in another 4 years. And we will say, the INEC chairman is bad, or, I was having a conversation earlier today. Perhaps it's time for Nigeria to have a woman at the helm of affairs, in INEC, for example. So we need systems in place, because everything we complain about Nigeria is actually systemic. And I'm one of those people also advocating for a change of mindsets, because I think that there is a mental model that we currently have as a people, that it's almost as like a chicken and egg situation. One of the things that we haven't talked about through this election is poverty. And I've listened to everything that we're saying, and I'm wondering what we expect the people to trade with. What is the incentive for good governance? What is the incentive to have free and fair elections? So I think that, because the election is here, it's happening, we are not able to have deeper conversations. But I think that an effective democracy is beyond elections. And that's why, as I said earlier, elections are actually a conduit, a pathway to good governance. There's actually a reason why we go through this process every 4 years. It's actually not about this, the activity of elections. It's about good governance. But we're talking about a country that is currently the poverty capital of the world, the maternal mortality capital of the world. We have the largest child bride in Africa. So these are the issues. And so when we go to the polls, are we going to the polls to elect leaders that can change these things? Or are we going to the polls to just fulfill all righteousness every 4 years? So I don't know if you've gotten what I'm trying to say, but I'm saying that there are deeper systemic issues that I think we need to address, and having the right institutions in place could be the first step towards that.
Okay, let me come back to you, Doctor, here. She's talked about poverty, and in the political space, political science space, what role has poverty played in the Nigerian democratic system so far?
Of course, poverty poverty itself is not is something that is universal. It's when poverty is weaponized.
So would you say it's in Nigeria? Has it been weaponized? It's been weaponized.
Yeah, that is why it's a problem. There are poor people everywhere. Even in America, there are poor people. But the poverty we have in Nigeria, just like unemployment, has been weaponized. So people are impoverished, deliberately, so as to use them, so as to create some kind of personalities, from them. Like thugs, for instance. They are human beings like us, but somehow, they are being created over a period of time. So when poverty is weaponized, used as a tool, to make people to do their bidding, it becomes a real problem. Because somebody can just be poor and still have hope that tomorrow he may be rich. But when you have rendered the person so incapable of rising beyond that idea that it cannot be rich, or he cannot get out of the poverty except it does the bidding of somebody who is in the position to salvage him from that poverty, then it will be dancing with the tune of some godfather elements. There are people who believe that the only job they can get is political appointments. So they will want to dance around people whom they feel can give them such political appointments. But if people are empowered, if people are empowered to the extent that they have skills, even if they are not rich, but they have capacities, they have skills, they can fend for themselves. But when people have been rendered to become unskillful, without capacity, and they don't have any education, they don't have any trade, they are just so helpless.
So in this context, are we saying we're looking at multidimensional poverty and poverty of the mind all in the same bracket?
Exactly. So not just material poverty now. Of course, it begins with this sense of indoctrination, making them to feel that their only salvation or their only savior or messiah is them. And it is only when they put them in position by all means, even if they die in the process, that is when they can get their salvation. So such people, they are helpless without politics. Politics becomes economics, to them. It becomes the only means of livelihood to them. So when people, have capacity, when people have skills, even if they are materially poor, somehow they can still rise above this idea of petty politics.
Just wondering, this is featured in political science classes? My colleagues in Lagos have got questions for you. Go ahead, guys.
Dr. Izu, you've just spoken now about the various types of poverty and how you can weaponize it and how it impacts the process. But could you say that the desperation is also driven by the kind of political system that we run? Earlier on in the day, we were talking to some other guests who pointed out that because it's a winner-take-all system, the desperation levels are high, because if you are not in the winning bracket, then there's nothing for you. And that also goes all the way down. So perhaps if we take a look at the system and other systems that might be able to help us make it less of a battle for life, we might not be able, those political actors might not be able to weaponize poverty the way they are able to right now, because there are no other options. Is that a tenable argument?
Okay, and thank you very much. I know some people have advanced the idea of proportional representation. Like in South Africa, where it's not winner, it's not first past the post, it's not winner takes all. Somehow they believe that that could reduce the desperado tendency in some politicians. But I don't think that is truly the case. The reason why we have this sense of, heightened, desperation is not because we don't have proportional representation. We're not the only country that is practicing this first past the post, or this this system that we're practicing. Now, America and some other countries practice the system, and the reason why why poverty is easily weaponized in Nigeria, why people are used as easy tools to disrupt the democratic, the electoral process, is because of the fact that, over a period of time, people have not developed capacities. Even when politicians or leaders say they are setting up skills acquisition centers, they are not really skills acquisition centers. So they say, they are just centers to score cheap political points. So I believe that if we have what built Japan, and why people are trooping to China to go and set up industries and so on and so forth, is because it's not just because they have large population, but it's because their population, are been given the right capacities, to be able to function in factories and industries and so on and so forth. So Nigeria today has a highly youthful population, but this youthful population should not only be, zeroed, down to say, okay, youth should participate in election or in politics. You should participate in all segments of society, in technology, in agriculture, in things that can bring about, their increase their capacity and increase material life. China today has the largest number of a young millionaire. What are we talking about in Nigeria? Are we talking about the fact that Nigeria, it has the potential to have, the highest number of young billionaires, in Africa and so on and so forth? Or we're talking about the fact that Nigeria, has the potential to have the largest number of maybe, young internet fraudsters? So I believe that we should be talking about the idea of, capacity. The reason why poverty will continue to be weaponized in Nigeria and beyond is because the youths, they have not developed capacities, skills, and so on and so forth. There is no, for instance, look at the reactions or the celebrations in Kano. Somebody won election and the party was declared the winner. Just to celebrate, you are destroying everywhere. So that one is just celebration. So what about if that party has not been declared the winner? That means they would have burned down the state. So this mentality, this wrong mentality, this wrong perception, I believe is what is really driving us, to the negative side of life.
We're still keeping an eye on all the outstanding results that are being expected. Quite a number of states. Buki, we're compiling them.
Yes,
just a little while ago.
Yes, I was.
There's several states.
Like Chamberlain, I was wondering if anything else would drop. Let them go fast.
That was Chamberlain who was talking, really. What you're seeing
indeed.
in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, there are live pictures from the Kaduna Collation Center. I wonder if we can listen in if they're saying anything. All right, then. In that case,
Okay.
let's go on with what we Let's
What
go
we
with
have.
we were saying that there were some states that are outstanding.
Outstanding.
Abia and Enugu, of course, have been suspended by INEC for further action on them. There are a couple of states that have been declared inconclusive. I think two.
Adamawa
In the
has
case of
also been
Adamawa has now been
declared
declared inconclusive, just like
due to the margin of lead.
right, just in the same way that I believe it's Kebbi that has been declared inconclusive. We're still waiting on Taraba for the results there as well. But we have received, I believe it was Mark who pointed that out, about 18 results already. So we're halfway there. We're more than halfway actually, if we're thinking of 28 states. We've got 10 more, and we've just mentioned quite a number of the 10. So we are keeping a continuing eye on that. But I wonder if we could return to the discussion. And let me start with you, Bosse, here in Lagos. And the issues coming from what Dr. Izu was talking about most of the things that we have being the kind of things that we could possibly improve upon and not have people weaponize. And that is not a question of the system, is how it has been utilized by the persons. But let me then ask you, following through, we've had elections since 1999.
That's correct.
Is it fair to say that on each election cycle, at least from 2007, there has been significant incremental difference, positive difference that we have built on with the experience of the previous election? And if so, what is it that is the missing ingredient that we are not able to get to the end?
I think that's a very important question. So I think the word is definitely not significant improvement, but the word is definitely, marked or incremental improvement. And I think we've seen it. For example, we can all acknowledge that we've seen it with technology, right? We've gone from manual to digital, and, we're progressing. But I think that also with every election, right, there has been, INEC as the institution and the commission that is responsible for elections has actually gone back to the drawing board, and we can see areas of improvement. Now, if I think about it from a civil society perspective, it has definitely become more inclusive generally when you think about persons with disability, for example. And then, of course, with the introduction of an electoral act, there is an opportunity to say, what should we improve upon? So I think if we're being honest, there has been incremental progress. I think that where we have had challenges are the areas where people are involved, where human beings are involved, right? And I think that it takes us back to that. I was listening to conversation earlier, and somebody was saying Nigeria will happen even to the best of technology, even to the best of innovation. And it takes us back to, so what is that missing piece? And so when you say, why haven't we gotten to the end? It's because they are human beings that are going to be at the polling units, right? Who are going to be responsible for actually conducting election. And to the degree that you cannot control human behavior, right? You only have to put in the right, we were talking earlier about incentives, right? So what is the incentive structure to do right?
So if we moved technology up, to the level where Beavers can now accommodate voting, or we develop some form of technology where we can, adopt e-voting and move a bit forward, Nigeria will still happen to that as well.
Yes, and one of the reasons, and I don't know if we've thought about this, but one of the reasons why electronic voting might be very difficult in Nigeria is the trust element. Right? Because unless that data is not going to be seen by a human being
or processed in any way by any human.
Anyway, and what I'm even talking about is not what happens as a result of a human being being able to manipulate the result, but it's that if they understand how you voted and they have those records, then that can actually be used to your disadvantage if the human beings, it's like what we talk about coding. Who codes really determines, how whatever that is, that thing that has been coded actually is applied. So really and truly, even though we would like to move, I think that's where we should be going, but there needs to be the right incentives for us to vote electronically and for it not to be used against me. So I think
Very,
that
We have an incentive.
I just think you showed that. I just begin to show that when you mentioned that.
APC, please come forward to sign if you are close by.
What I can take from the presentations is the capacity of the collation officer of the party agents of the PDP. You could see that, and even the NNPP, you could see that they were giving justifications, intelligent justifications, why it should not make a return. So there was no issue of trying to be violent. They made serious justification. And if you weigh that vis-a-vis, the returning officer, you could see that going forward, INEC need to, not just professors, of course, they are professors, but, elections are very technical issues, especially when it comes to this issue of technology. They must have people who can really relate with this issue of technology. So I believe that the next step would be to go to court. But I just want to, emphasize that issue of capacity. Capacity for the party agent, capacity for the INEC staffers, for them to understand from the returning officer to the ad hoc staff, that capacity must be there so that we'll not be having these issues of. And then lastly, I want to say that these beavers is a technology. I believe going forward, there's a way, the process, the beavers, could be synchronized, with the IRF, so that they don't need to be snapping this stuff and sending, because that's why we have a lot of discrepancies, a lot of shadow results, fake results coming here and there. I believe there could be a way to synchronize. As soon as people are crediting, and voting, it's uploading automatically to the IRF.
Wouldn't that be tantamount to the electronic voting bit, which they said the law did not provide for? No, electronic transmission.
I don't think it's going to be equal to that.
So what you're saying is what? Once you get accredited and vote, because
with
voting is thumbprinting.
Yes.
So BVAS is just for accreditation.
Yeah, okay, for the accreditation, okay, you are correct in that. But even the accredited votes, because that is what the court is going to use, as the basis and to judge issues now. So I think even at that, once people accredit, they should be transmitted automatically. Until we get to that issue of electronic voting.
So several room for improvements in the entire thing, and lots of questions that many people have and will be leaving with, because we have to thank you, Dr. Iroro Izu, lecturer, Department of Political Science and International Relations, University of Abuja. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, so well, the news at 10, but yes, as you can see there, the candidate of the APC Obasani has been declared winner of the Kaduna governorship elections. You just saw some of those back and forth that went through. Well, the news at 10 will be coming up on the hour. Gentlemen, ladies.
Yes, the coverage of the election and
continues.
All of that will continue after the news.
Indeed, we'll still have a number of states to go. 20 down, 8 more to go.
So I will keep that for you. So don't forget, the studio will continue